My name is Florin Zobashku. I'm executive editor of Science Business. And today I have the pleasure to moderate this timely session, I think, on startups. So what can Europe do differently for new and scaling companies to succeed? We've been hearing all sorts of complaints about how Europe is lagging behind the US and China in all sorts of fields, including not the creation of startups, but the scaling up of startups. So we would like to tackle this issue today, especially because there's a new political leadership in town, and this new political leadership has its eyes on the startup world, and they want to boost it any way they can. So to discuss all that, we have a panel of 5 distinguished guests, which I'm going to invite on stage now. First, we have Annika Borgenstam. She's professor and vice president at KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. Please join me on stage. We have, yes, Jean-Marc Bourret, Chief Executive Officer at EIT Health. Welcome. Then we have Jimena Garcia Romeo Nunez, Chief Executive Officer of Alkion Photonics. Please welcome. Clark Parsons, Chief Executive Officer of the European Startup Network. And last but not least, Marina Silveri. She's Executive Director at Arter Attractiveness Research Territory in Italy. All right, so welcome everyone. I shall start with an easy question, and this one goes to all of you. We have a commissioner for startups. That's unprecedented for the European Union. Is that good or bad? Does it matter? In any case, what kind of expectations do you have from Commissioner Zaharieva in terms of supporting European startups? So who wants to start? Yes, go ahead, Jean-Marc.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Is it good to get a new commissioner? Being especially focused on startups, I would say yes, that's a good signal going forward. I mean, it's time indeed to dedicate specific effort across border. So this commissioner is basically will carry a critical mandate to shape also the health innovation ecosystem for supporting European biotech sector. To addressing shortages in critical medicines, digitalization, and support the further implementation of the open health data space, supporting the tons of EU-based startups operating in the field of digital health and artificial intelligence. The new Biotech Act also is a great signal, which is aiming to improve access to capital and create a supportive environment for biotech startups, which are crucial for tackling public health and challenges addressing the market needs in Europe. We know that he's going forward also to addressing the regulatory simplification. This is part of the mandate, which is one of the key issues that the startups are facing for many years. And this is a clear commissioner mandate call for streamlining regulations that inhibit innovations and scaling their business opportunity. As a concrete example, 2 weeks ago, I mean, it's not so far, DigiSanté has announced the adoption of new HTA rules for joint scientific consultation on medical devices and in vitro diagnostics, which is a really good start, I would say, since it covers aspects such as the submission of requests for health technology developers, the selection and consultation, of the stakeholders organizations, patients, and other relevant experts, and the cooperation with the European Medicine Agency during the joint scientific consultation. I think that it looks like, the FDA pre-advisory group, which is supporting startups in the biotech and medtech sector in the US, streamlining and facilitating the way to design the clinical protocol design of the clinical trial. Last but not the least, I would say that the competitiveness compass is addressing this big issue within the drug use report. Is also considering, a key strategic scheme, which is basically focusing on skills. And yesterday I met Roxana Milsatu, the new executive vice president, in charge of social rights, skills, quality jobs, and preparedness. And she is placing significant emphasis on the upskilling and reskilling to meet the demands of the evolving market, labor market in Europe, which is aiming to align with Europe's wide ambitions to ensure the success of startups and SMEs by developing a talent pool and supporting the internship placement of PhD degree within startups in biotech, deep technologies, and so on and so forth. So the mandate is also calling for increased focus on lifelong learning trainings for health industry workforces, skills to support mid-sized company and large corporate industry, obviously, not only the startups, basically. And in a nutshell, I would say that those two new commissioner, vice president, will work all together to strengthen the cross-border collaboration, which is also the last aspect of reinforcing the support for startups and scale-up across Europe, since we know that they are not only used to looking for access to finance, but also collaboration with industry, especially R&D collaboration and strategic cooperation, collaborating with university for the clinical development, and with academic and research organizations so far. So I think that it's really important without, putting aside the Central Eastern Europe countries to address the innovation gap divide, making sure that we are also supporting this innovation gap across Europe between those Eastern countries and the other more mature countries.
All right. Who wants to go next on the issue of the Commission? Yeah.
I can let a lady go first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we are a startup, so we really suffer from all those pains that you mentioned. So we think it's good to have a commissioner fully dedicated to sort out and to unlock situations which our competitors and our competitors are anywhere are not suffering. And basically, startups lack two things, that is time and money. Anything that can help us, any of these assets, is a good news for us. And that's related to the administrative workload, for instance, anything that is related to streamline all the process. That's also related to fragmentation, anything that helps us to go into market with a more efficient approach. It's something we do really require from Europe. And any instrument that helps us to access this funding, which I think probably will be covered later from the private, that in a worldwide situation like the one that we face, we are semiconductors, so this is a global game we need to address. We think it's going to be beneficial for Europe. But what we more expect is not a strategy, but actual actions, because as we all know, it's not on the strategy that companies or institutions win, it's on the actual operation. So we're looking forward to see new measures in place that really help us, people like us that commit our lives to change the industry, to change the world, to change Europe, to bring back value into our life to success.
All right. You want to go next?
I would love to, just because it's in our title. I feel like I'm compelled to. So I am leading the umbrella organization of the Startup Associations of Europe. So you can imagine we were quite overjoyed when we got a startup commissioner. I would point out what's really fascinating is structurally, this commissioner was separated from the previous mandate of education, and her responsibilities are innovation, research, and startups, which I think is a really strong signal to everyone in this community, as well as the startup community, how important this connection is between the research and innovation funding that's going into our institutions and the amount of market value and startups that are coming out. So it was quite fascinating to see President von der Leyen do this. And now we have a really interesting situation because if you read the letter to Commissioner Zaharieva and the things she is supposed to accomplish, her two primary goals, even stated in the letter, are the 28th regime, as you've mentioned. Let's streamline the corporate structure across Europe for scaling and investing, and also Capital Markets Union to get more investment. Ironically, those are the two mandates that are given to other commissioners. Luckily, they're now working as a working group. I think there's 5 or 6 commissioners sitting around the table. They met last week. So it's really fascinating to see. We might actually have real teamwork here between commissioners supporting each other to try and get real action. I totally agree with you. A strategy is going to be great, but some real laws and some real actions are going to be something we'll all be working for.
All right. Annika and then Marina, what do you think about this change in politics with regards to startups in Brussels?
Well, coming from the academia, perhaps it doesn't matter directly for us, but of course the research that we perform, we wanted to end up in practical use, and then startups is one of the possibilities, and the other one is of course in larger companies and so. So from that perspective, and from an academic point of view, I think it's most important is that the research comes out in some way. But then, of course, we are really interested also in the startups. So from that perspective, I'm positive. But then from a Swedish perspective, I think we are very strong when it comes to startups. But then it is the scaling that is the real challenge. And then I think it's very positive that we can, in Europe, support that Europe becomes stronger.
All right. Marina, what's the view from the regional perspective?
Yes, I think that for those like us are dealing with innovation and makes efforts to help startups to scale up and to follow their development is surely a good news to see this mention and this attention, this engagement clear by the Commission. But I think that it's interesting also to point out some doubt, some critical point on this choice of the Commission. Because I think that one of our problems is in Europe to have so many barriers, so many closed boxes, not interconnected among them. And so I'm afraid that also in this case we speak about startups, and the colleague told us it's not really a thing that interests myself directly. No? I would mention the Draghi report. Each of us can mention a part of this report because it's so broad, and you can find your expectation in this report. But in the part that has been mentioned also in the competitiveness compass, Draghi speaks about 2 forces for the productivity in Europe, to boost the productivity in Europe. One represented by startups and scale-ups, and so the disruptive innovation. The other one is the force of SMEs and corporates that could be in the position of adopt this innovation. But I would also add another aspect, not only adopt this innovation, but also participate to development of this innovation. Because they can help the development of startups, and I'm curious to know also your opinion directly, but also to invest in the startups. Because we know that the Compass told us that the public funds are not sufficient So we have to involve also our corporates to invest, to change their mindset, because now they are not so ready to invest in the funds, in the venture capital. They invest in some startups, but directly linked to the competitiveness of their business, not in general on innovation. To do that, we have to work on the creation of the context, the positive context to develop startups, not only concentrate maybe on the investment on startups. If we move our attention to the EIC, for example, the EIC, I in the task force at national level overseeing the program committee for Italy of the EIC and the European innovation ecosystem. At the beginning, the expectation was that the EIC invested in higher risk ventures in the market failure domain to help the disruptive innovation to develop themselves. But now, if you analyze the choice of EIC, it invests now in more capitalized company with co-investors, so with a market approach, and so now is also the moment to ask ourselves, the EIC that has been surely one of the most successful instruments that change the European innovation ecosystem, but one of the question is, the EIC has impacted in the innovation processes in Europe. Maybe not completely, because the choice at the opposite of DARPA model has been to invest in the startups, and maybe now we have to think about all the other players to create the real ecosystem on which the startups can develop themselves, but also scale up, and also decide to remain and to not develop their business abroad. Yeah. So the problem is, okay, startups, but also the ecosystem and the other players, because the risk is very high.
Right. Well, some of you already mentioned the competitiveness compass and the two main proposals in that, which are the 28th regime and the Capital Markets Union, and you mentioned the importance of investment. So these two proposals are targeting that investment issue. And do you think, to what extent do you think these two proposals are going to be helpful in solving this challenge, this investment challenge for the EU startup sector? Who wants to comment on that?
I can go first quickly. I think absolutely. Look, 18% of the investment in Europe in the startups is cross-border. The rest is not. So if you've started a company spinning out in Budapest or Lisbon, good luck. You are at the mercy of your local or regional venture capital ecosystem. So what is the 28th regime? Right now, if you're trying to invest in a company, you're confronted with 27 different legal forms, banking forms, stock option forms, etc. It's almost impossible to be on a Zoom call in Stockholm with a founder in Milan and decide to invest and press a button and invest. It just doesn't happen. Sounds kind of crazy, but that happens every day in America. That's how the system works. They have what's called a simple agreement for equity, a SAFE. Y Combinator pioneered it long ago. Everyone knows how the ecosystem works. It's a functioning system, and Europe has to get that. There's a proposal called EU Inc., which was a grassroots movement to really try and crystallize this idea. You need to be able to invest instantly, digitally, across borders, and scale the same way. So if we had one legal form, we can talk about tax and labor law, perhaps that stays national. Nobody wants to get into arguments we don't need to get into. But just literally the creation of a company and the formation of capital and the initial stock allocation to the employees and letting it roam like our tourists and our telephones can roam, letting it move around Europe is so crucial to creating a real single market. We don't have a single market for startups and scale-ups, honestly. We have 27 communities. They're networked, but they're not a single market yet.
Yeah. Jimena, do you think this will help you as a company?
I hope it does. As you mentioned, one of our struggles is the fact, and we are real experience, talking with ventures in different countries. We are based in Spain, in Europe, and they ask us, in order to fund you, I need you to reallocate in this country in Europe, which is not a problem itself, but it sounds like a bit crazy because you can understand that when it's overseas, because you want to have your investment closer, there is time some difference, it's a different business approach, but it's really surprising with very nearby countries to us need this requirement to invest on us. Same on people. You didn't mention, but for us in our industry, talent is a really limited resource. Everyone we know is hiring, we are hiring. We cannot talk about labor contracts in Europe. I don't want to discuss even why we are training highly educated people from outside Europe. When they finish the training, I'm talking finishing the PhD, we struggle to get a contract for them. That's crazy. We are spending a lot of money on R&D, on training highly educated people, and then we let them go back into their homes instead of using that talent that we created for the sake of Europe. So I do really think that's really necessary. Coming back to your point, I don't want to let it go. We are an EIC accelerator company, so we do think EIC has an impact. But I see your point in the fact that maybe the framework needs to be revisited to understand that some companies require a different time framework, for instance, for investment, more similar to the DARPA ones. So, yeah, I do think that streamlining is essential.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a yes or yes. IP is a good example again. Mm-hmm. IP, talent, administrative process, investment.
Jean-Marc, you smiled when Clark talked about letting capital roam across borders in the EU. How do you think these proposals could impact the work of EIT Health, for example?
It seems like many investors from Italy, from Spain, would be willing to invest into startups which have been incorporated in Sweden. I mean, and we should have to make sure that allowing this cross-border investor between venture capital funds is obviously really a need be, making sure that we are simplifying throughout a special legal regime for startups, making their life much more easier and de-risking from a tax perspective, from a labor law perspective, from a employment contract standpoint, the daily life of the startups which have been incorporated in Norway, being capable to welcome new investors from Spain, from France, from Germany, without being exposed to amazing administrative issues related to labor law, employment contract, tax issues, and so on and so forth. They are not large corporate companies. They are not having tons of employees that are fully dedicated to legal department, employment department, HR department, and so on and so forth. So it's up to Europe to make it simple, for sure, and it's time to act across border, definitively. Yeah.
All right. I don't know, Annika, if you have any thoughts on the 28th regime and the Capital Markets Union. I mean, I know KDH is very good at producing spin-out companies. What do you think is going to be the impact on the work that you're doing?
Well, of course, I mean, I can also see that there are very positive sides of it, because like looking at Sweden, it's a small country, so the market is small, the number of talents is also, that you can recruit, is also small, and then I also must say that I really think that what we really need to do is then to see to, that the talents that we have educated, that they can stay in EU and in our countries. So of course, I think there are many, and also from an investment point of view, that it's more capital, that is of course very good. But then I also see that it must be large, huge problems with it when it comes to tax law, labor law. And then from a Swedish perspective also, or from a research perspective, Sweden have this quite special model with the professor's privilege, and I think that this comes in here, which would also be, I see really a lot of huge challenges.
Marina,
Yes.
you're working again at the regional level. You're working with local startup ecosystems. Has this news about potential changes at the EU level traveled all the way down to the grassroots level? And how do you see impacting your work?
I think it's crucial. Starting from the definition, because we have in Italy, for example, a definition of startups that I think that it's different from the other countries. And following this definition impact on the tax regulation, the state aid regulation, the incentive that we can give to this category or not. And I can share also, speaking about definition, we attract, because we are a project now on our territory, maybe if we have enough time after we can speak about, we attract a deep tech on our territory, and they don't want to be defined as a scale-up or startups of the original country, because they are based on another European countries, because they define themselves an EU scale-up. And I think that also in the Compass and also in the last documents of the Commission, this is the direction. We have to change also the definition and consequently also the regulation. And this is crucial, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. All right. As I said in my introduction, when it comes to startups in Europe and scaling them up, there seem to be lots and lots of complaints. And the impression is that nothing is working, and our economy is tanking and so on, and the US and China are speeding ahead. But Clark, I want to ask you, if there's anything going well at the moment in this sector, what is it? Are there any positive examples? Is there anything to be hopeful about?
Absolutely. It's a big ask, but forget China and the US for a moment. It's a big ask. If you look at the progress we've made in Europe in the last 20 years, it's extraordinary. We have about 1,000 venture capital funds. We have an incredible number of unicorns. We have record amounts of venture capital being invested. We lead the world in oncology startups and patents. We don't lead the world in oncology funding. That's the topic. Yeah. But when it comes to the building blocks that we need to lead the world in a lot of industries of the future, we have the talent, we have the technical breakthroughs, thanks to all the research institutions. We have an incredible market if we would just use it. So all the building blocks are there. I'm an American, but I've been in Berlin for 30 years. I'm extremely optimistic about Europe's future if we can just get these puzzle pieces together. So, there's a lot to complain about, and we, of course, are focusing on that because we hope it gets fixed. But don't get the wrong impression. I'm not doing this because, I'm in a bad mood about Europe. I'm extremely optimistic about our chances. Of course, humanoid robots, the data and the innovations are happening elsewhere. We're going to, in 10 years, see other continents, robots roaming our streets all day, and we don't have, anybody in that hunt. So a lot of the industries of the future were already shut out. A lot of AI infrastructure, already forget it. But there's a lot of things we can be really excited about, around energy, around climate tech, green tech, biotech, health. There's an incredible number of sectors where Europe is right there. And if we would just get the growth capital we need and have one market, we'd already be creating some really world-beating companies.
Yeah. The follow-up to this, does anyone share the optimism?
Oh, please.
Yes, why?
She's a founder.
Obviously, I'm in a startup, okay? I got 2 kids on the mortgage. If I don't believe in this, I wouldn't be doing this.
Right.
Oh, come on. I get up every morning to change the world. And I make it through photonics, through semiconductors. No, but I think we have very strong foundation. Europe has invested a lot of R&D, so we have the talent and the know-how. It's true that you think of the transmission into the market and the diminishing role of the customer, which is the industry. That makes you feel like crying. But I think we are in a better position to come back there if we do not have those basements, okay? So I'm really optimistic about it. I think there is room for it. I think there are a number of industries that are still not settled down. So there are windows of opportunities where we can be an interesting player, okay? It doesn't need to be the leader, it can be a me too. But we can be an interesting player and make a difference. So I do really think there are assets to leverage. The question is that we need to be very smart and efficient because the reality is on both sides. With Anis, we are having a lot of pressure, a lot of commitment, financial commitment, and a culture that's kind of a bit different to the culture we've been grown up. So we need to become more competitor, more customer-oriented, more goals-oriented. And probably as an American, you better understand this. But this is my life. If I weren't optimistic, I would have switched my job. That's the reality.
Is there more optimism? Yes.
Yeah, I would also say that I'm optimistic because there is a very negative picture that we read about, and of course it's a lot of truth in that, but one should remember then also that it is a lot of fantastic research going on that then can lead to startups, or it goes into larger companies that can evolve that to something that come into use, because there is a lot of relevant research going on. So from that perspective, I'm positive. But then I also think that it's extremely important that there are instruments that really make the more basic research that it's taken care of, that it can be taken care of by companies for startups and so on, so that it's really come into use. And then, well, I said that I was optimistic, but I am optimistic. But then I also think that it's not just because I'm from academia, but I also think that it's important to not to forget about the basic research funding, because that is what leads to the innovations later on, so that we have a good balance, so that we are also prepared for the future.
Can I add?
Yes.
The day after of the launch of the PSIC, I heard Donald Trump by radio, and he said it's only a new challenge for our researchers. We have the most excellent researchers in the world, and so for us it's not a problem. And when I heard this sentence, I thought, but most of these excellent researchers has been trained in our universities. If we adopt the same approach of the USA in this moment to close the mobility of our researchers, maybe this is a very problem also for the USA. So this is I would change and I would see this aspect in a positive way. But it's true, the excellence in researchers is, most of them are European, or not?
Many, perhaps not most. I mean, it's,
Jean-Marc, do you have reasons for optimism, especially looking back at the work that EIT Health is doing and the changes you have seen over the years?
Yeah, first of all, I do echo the statement from my fellow speakers. We should have to be proud of the amazing assets which have been generated over the last 2 decades in Europe. All the ingredients are there. We have to adjust a little bit, some identified bottleneck, specific adjustments that needs to be considered to make more impact and supporting the development of further amazing startups by design and scale up so far. So I would say that the quality of the research coming from our academic and research organization is by far at the top forefront of the world. The tech transfer is doing well. I mean, it's working well, and many amazing, especially in the field of health and tech, have been developed in cancer and vaccines. I mean, over the last 4 years. I mean, COVID-19 pandemic crisis, Europe saved the world. I mean, the 2 main vaccines have been developed and invented in Europe. To make it clear. From Germany, from Italy, France, Sweden, and so on and so forth. Having said that, there are a couple of adjustments that are needed, like spin-offing a company, depending on the rules when it comes to the IP ownership of the researcher, is something that we have to adjust across border, first of all, and making sure that the spin-off are by design incorporated with an international mindset. I mean, cross-border, pan-EU mindset. The data are speaking by themselves. When you look at the European Investment Fund data on the success rate of startups that are scaling up, 70% of the startups that are successfully scaling up have been created by design with international team in Europe. If you're creating a startups with only local team, you're reducing by 70% your likelihood of success to scale up. So the first key change is there. International team by design. Obviously, when you're creating the startups, the investors are used to look for people and science. It's not enough. People with international mindset, cross-border, and the science, obviously, the key question is about the way to transfer the IP at the good conditions for the startup and for the investors. This is the second aspect. The second adjustment needed to support the spin-off is basically to make sure that we are welcoming at the early stage phase, before the startup creation, I mean before the startup incorporation, private equity investor. Whether they are venture builder or whether they are venture capital funds that are interested in investing during the project phase, investing into the research and academic partners to support the project. By doing so, that's the best way to secure that the private investor will be supporting the researcher as an entrepreneur to design properly the target product profile, the market access strategy, the equity story. Many startups are failing to make their equity story flying for the future. The success rate is linked to the way that you're shaping by design at the beginning of the story, your equity story also, and the step-by-step fundraising one that you're managing going forward. So I would say startup creation, cross-border, international mindset, team, welcoming as soon as possible, private investor, whether they are venture builder and or private VCs, investing during the project phase, 12 to 18 months before the startup incorporation. That means that we have to change the culture of the relationship between the academic partners willing to put money on the project to support the researcher, and renegotiating the conditions to get back your return. I mean, as an academic partner, that's the key issue, especially in some Nordics countries whereby the IP is in the pocket of the professor, which is not the case across Europe. At the end, it's quite specific to Nordics countries so far. I would say that those are the main ingredients, and the European Commission should have to support, as an institutional investor, to support venture capital funds that are willing to take risk before the startup creation, so project phase, pre-seed, seed round, with a dedicated instruments to make it happen. When it comes to the scaling up, it's a different story, and I will go back on that matter later on if you agree.
Do you agree with this?
I found myself nodding. I wanted to just applaud because this is such a huge point about the early phase and how difficult it is and how important it is. I've been coaching a lot this year EIC projects on the side. The ESN is in a consortium doing it. And I've seen, they're not startups yet, they're just projects. They're really promising technology that's been getting funding from the EIC, amazing teams, but the primary deficit they of course have is that they've been researchers all their lives, and now they're going to be trying to start a company. And so they're starting at zero with business knowledge. So I think this is something the EIC has now figured out that, and it's something I plead with every research and university institution out there, put 1% of your budget into entrepreneurship and business training. It's the greatest investment you could ever make. But this is just, it's such a huge point because there's this valley of death in a lot of these research projects where they're not ripe enough to get funding maybe, but they're too far along to get another research grant. And so we have to find a way to extend this clock because the moment they take outside investment, venture capital, the clock is ticking. Those investors want a return in 7 years, 10 years. And deep tech, medical things, they might take 12, 15 years to get to market. A lot of the first of the kind, environmental plants you need to build to recycle plastic take 100 million just to prove it. Marvel Fusion has gone to Colorado State University to get 150 million just to prove that their fusion solution works. So some of these projects that we see in Europe that are so promising have really crazy capital needs that we need to really think about with the research ecosystem and the startup ecosystem coming together to say, how can we solve things so that it works in Europe for this valley of death in the research phase and also for these extremely capital intensive deep tech startups that are trying to navigate these really rocky waters between I was a research project and now I'm going to try and test my value on the market.
Yes, Jean-Marc, then Annika, then...
I fully echo what you are sharing with us. I mean, the researchers should have to spend time and invest into their complementary set of skills like entrepreneurship skills, innovation skills, business-related skills like market access strategy, target product profile design. I mean, it's not a bad word. I mean, it's not a techno push, it's about the techno pull and addressing an unmet market need. If you're not going to addressing and identifying the market, you can do whatever you want, techno push, your product will never reach the market, full stop. So investing into a complementary skills of a set of skills, so entrepreneurship, innovation, market access strategy, regulatory affairs, clinical development skills. Many researchers are a bit far from the way to design a clinical development plan strategy, and so on and so forth. So for sure, EITLs is basically providing such a kind of courses for researchers. We are bringing those kind of platforms to EIC also. We are collaborating a lot with EIC in this regard. Last but not the least, the value of death. I mean, we should have to accept, the sooner you're killing a bad project, the better it is. Otherwise, the researcher will be navigating within the valley of death for many years, and he will never succeed. So we have to put our effort into really robust technologies, the proper mindset for researchers, being capable to listen with business colleagues that are willing to help and support so far, and bringing the proper level of resources at the right time, because when you're deciding to venture in your company, clock is ticking, and if your equity story is a bad equity story, you will never succeed.
Right. Annika, you wanted to reply to
Yes,
what Claude
I
had
wanted
said.
to comment there because I think it's interesting, and when looking from what I see as our mission, I think the help for the startups from the research idea, I think that is really in our mission, and at KTH we have something that is quite successful with KTH Innovation that helps to start up around 30 companies per year. But then when it comes to the scaling, I don't see that as the university's mission. So then it should be some some other one, like in Sweden, it could be research institutes taking that role. But what we could do, it is for the research and also education when it comes to, like you ask for business models and so, but also for the scaling. So I think there we have something to do, even if I don't see us as like responsible for or having in our mission the scaling as such, but when it comes to education and research.
Right. Yes, Marina.
Yes, I totally agree on the development of skills for entrepreneurs, for deep tech startups. But I think that in this field we have to break again another barrier. That is the cross-pollination also of careers. Not only interdisciplinarity inside the university, but in Italy it's a problem, I don't know, maybe not everywhere, but it's impossible to follow the academic career, to go out, to have experience in private companies, in the public sector, in association and so on, and come back. Your experience outside is not evaluated positively, but is a penalty for your career in the university. And this is a limit not only for the capacity of researchers to develop startups, but also of the academic and the quality, I think, of the curricula in that for this kind of skills. I know some founders of deep tech that which has had exactly this type of careers inside and outside the university. So if Europe, a European Commission can help with some bridges, with some instruments to help and to evaluate it positively, this kind of careers, I think that the impact will be really positive.
Right.
May I add 2
Yes,
cents?
please.
Okay. We are quite a unique company in this sense because I don't come from academia. So I'm a business person with a technical education, so I can understand technology. So my question is, and we suffer from this, because most of our employees are researchers and they have like this fear, like this needs to success because otherwise I'm wasting my time. So I understand your point, but on the other hand, I think there's a cultural thing. It's like, why do researchers need to do research in academia? Why don't we tell them there are some other opportunities for you to drive science? We are telling science is something about the academia. Bringing science to society is the mission. We don't do science just to know. We do science to do a better world. And that seems something quite shocking to me. On the other hand, and you mentioned the early stage of the company, I joined quite early, also because we have a venture builder on board. And the reality, I think that really changed the mindset of the approach of how the company evolved and how you tell your story. That's why we get an AIC quite early, being 4 people, which I still think was a great while. But that is quite unique to Europe. It's quite usual. I've been in the MIT a couple of years ago in a program for postdoc execs and on, and they told us how they put a research student, a science student, together with a business admin student, and they forced them to work together in a project during their studies. That builds, because the training afterwards is really nice, but there are some cultural tics and trips and bias that we have internally by the way we've been grown up. So I could encourage us to do that even earlier, not once they become researchers, but earlier. Why don't we have cross programs between science and business admin people? Because they both can learn. And that's key for the success, is that science, key for the success in the industry. I'm not talking about Nobel Prizes, but to bring science into industry, we need to have an industry mindset. And that's created through understanding that it needs to have a so what. It needs to have a plan that customer rules, not science people score, is the key. So I would even bring that earlier into the training process of for young people. And coming back to you, I think this culture of, oh, if I go private, I will never go be a good researcher, is really hampering European researchers to deliver back, to give back to society.
Annika, you wanted to reply to this?
I just would like to say that I couldn't agree more, that I really think it's so important that the science that we are doing within academia, that it really comes out to society and like to industries, and also and then it's very important that we have a tight collaboration, because then what we are doing can really come into use, because then we also know what is it that is asked for, what is needed, because of course curiosity-driven research is very important, because we don't know where it is going to lead to. But then it's also very important with the research that is, I mean, it can still be basic research, but that we to some degree know what it is that we are going to solve. And then we need to have the collaboration. And then it's also needed that the industry have the possibility to have this collaboration, that their scientific level is at a certain level, so that we can have these discussions. And yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience? Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Joachim Garniena. I'm with a French research and technology organization called CEA. Well, let me first thank the panelists for the interesting points that you've raised, among which the necessity for having a market capital union. My question is this: you've raised the issue of European investors not being able to invest cross borders within Europe. But in my opinion, that's only half the problem, because one problem is that investors are not able to invest. The other half of the problem is that investors, at least in Europe, are not willing to invest in risky investments. And even if you give the chance to, I don't know, let's say French investors to invest into a Swedish startup, they may not go for it, because at the end of the day, investing in a startup is very, very risky. It's a very long-term investment. Like one of you said, it's about like a 10-year investment. And people in Europe don't usually go for long-term investments. They don't have pension funds. They don't need to save money for their kids' tuition fees, college tuition fees. So how do you think Europe should convince its investors, European investors, to go more and more towards riskier investments?
Who wants to take that? Yeah, Clark.
I can do it, but Sweden is, I always understood Sweden is sort of where we'd all like to be in terms of the investment culture of the population. So I'd love to first hear your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Okay, because I had a bit difficulty in hearing the question. So
how do we get investors willing to take more risk in Europe? So a bit of a cultural mindset question on the investment class.
Yeah. But I don't think that when it comes to the scaling, I don't think that Sweden is much better than everybody else. I think we are strong when it comes to the startups. And one reason is, of course, when it comes to capital, it is that, and investment, it is that we have this professor's privilege, which make the tech transfer non-existent, because the researchers own their own results. So if an investor comes, then they can only make an agreement with the researcher, and then they can have the IPR. And that, of course, is, from that perspective, it is much easier, and that leads then also to more startups and more innovations.
I mean, you've identified a lot of really several problems in one question. I'll try and throw a few answers out, if I may. First off, Nordic Angels is one of the best angel organizations based in Sweden. So I would say there's a huge class of investors out there willing to take risk, but you have identified most of our institutional investors in Europe are actually, if they're investing in VC, it's an American VC. And the irony is that the European investment funds numbers prove it. Venture capital funds in Europe outperform the US ones. They get 12 to 13% annual rate of return. So it's really crazy that our own capital that's supposed to be for our pension is going and being invested in somebody else's economy to drive their innovative startups and scale up. So that's one issue. But I mean, I'm in Germany, and it's, you can't legislate a mindset, but what you can do is make some structural changes. And I know that the savings and investment union ideas of Enrico Letta are really relevant for a lot of markets. Sweden might have an investment culture, but Germany does not. And we don't even have any kind of stock-based retirement system, which is what the finance minister just introduced. So we have a lot of work to do at the national level to get more of a savings and investment culture going. But look, investing in equity, whether it's on the Fortune 500 stock market or it's a startup, there's always risk involved, but venture capital funds are there to minimize the risk. And you know, traditionally, I mean, they're the people, that's the spreading of risk in an institutional way. So, you know, the asset class of VC has been proven now for 40 or 50 years. I mean, it's the same model that was used in whaling boats and, you know, the Merchant of Venice. Spread your risk and a big return will come back. I mean, that's all a VC fund is anyway. So Europe has a long way to go to change this mindset, but the opportunities are there. I'm totally convinced of that.
Jean-Marc, what are your thoughts on this issue of investment culture?
Yeah, investment culture is, I would say that it's about looking at the market as it has been shaped over the last 20 years, making a clear difference between capital risk, capital development, and capital growth. When it comes to the capital risk, three main actors are used to invest a lot and taking a lot of risk at the early stage phase, whether they are public investor, like Vinnova in Sweden, or like BPI France in France, and so on and so forth, acting as a private investor, basically, you know, supporting the venture capital markets. The VC funds, early stage investor, that are used to be invested by limited partners coming from industry sector or institutional investor, or the European Investment Fund, which is shaping the EU market, the EU VC market. When it comes to the health and tech sector, this is the second global portfolio of activities of the European Investment Fund over the last 20 years, just behind the ICT market so far. So I would say there is no, and the last but not least, the corporate venture funds that are looking for untapped innovations by investing into promising technology so far. So when it comes to early stage investment, I mean, capital risk in Europe, there is no big hurdles, big issues from member states, from Europe, from private investors, and the culture of business angels across Europe is really well developed so far. So according to me, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, no issue, no problem for early stage investment. The big issue is about capital development, a little bit, and capital growth, big issue. And this is where Europe should have to make a move to bring much more firepower to professional investors like venture capital funds, capital development, and capital growth, whereby when you are looking at the size of the VC funds for growth, they are like between 5 to 10 times smaller than in the US. When in Europe, venture capital funds are raising 500 million euro of fundraising, in the US it's 10 times bigger, like 5 to 10 billion dollars so far. So we are facing a big issue here.
Is that the main reason why so many startups go to the US?
This is not the only main reason. So now if you're looking at the problem from the startup perspective, it's a completely different story. The startup is led by an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is looking for financing sources, not only equity, and looking for market. Europe is so fragmenting in the health sector, at least in my sector. Right. It's so fragmented.
So it's an issue of the market, not
so
only
that means that the
investment.
biotech startups, when they are managing the clinical development strategy and the market access strategy, the first market entry they look for is US. Yeah. Single language, single market, single regulatory pathway, 250 million citizens, same pricing strategy. Full stop. Yeah. If you are going back to Europe and if you want to make Europe great again, let's breaking down the silos between the market access conditions in Europe. Let's harmonize the way that we are designing the clinical protocol designs, whereby a multicentric clinical trial is led in Spain, Italy, and Hungary, the clinical outcomes are acceptable for the HTA bodies in France and in Germany. I mean, it doesn't make sense to ask a comprehensive set of clinical data, since we can assume that the Spanish citizens is not so different from the French citizens, I mean, it doesn't make sense. So we have to harmonize this. We have to harmonize the market access strategy and making sure that the biotech company, medtech or diagnostic company is getting a really true market access opportunity in Europe. If so, the private investors will come back in Europe to reinvest a lot. Full stop, nothing else.
So it looks like the European Commission and the capitals have a lot of work to do to harmonize all these, to iron out all these wrinkles that you just pointed out. I'm afraid we ran out of time. We're a bit over. We're actually a bit over time. So I want to thank you all for this very nice discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. And I want to thank the audience for having the patience to stay with us up until now. There's